Hey there. Give me a shout out. Let me know if you guys can hear me. You should be able to see my screen too. Just a simple Z-sphere bowl. Hey Peter. Hey John. Looks like Kurt, we did not change your name yet. Lewis, can you make a note of that? We have to make his name. We made a note of it last week, so we should not go another week. Alvaro, Roberto, Paul, Ian, Mark, Raphael, Steve. All right, guys. Great. It's hard to change names, Omar. It's really hard, actually. All right, guys. So what are we learning today? How is things going? Give me just let me know. How's the material going? Are you digesting it? Is it coming too fast? Too slow? You can see names. Okay, guys, we need to check. There, I've turned off attendees can view attendee list, so you should not see emails. Oops. Mark, trying to wrap my head around brush differences, so today's the day for that. Thomas left me a VM. Is that an email? Uh-oh. We've got a little creature running around. My daughter has learned to say no. That was a surprise. Still going through Module 2 to clarify lectures. I've got to bring the beast in. Aisha, middle of a class. Go see mommy. All right. Okay. Raphael, it's great. First test with 22. Okay, Raphael, sorry. The first test has 11 questions. So you'll see it if you go back to that link now. That's been fixed. Kurt still working on the projects. Jay going through the lectures. Digesting brushes. Looks like we're in the brush territory. So this is good. This is exactly what I wanted you guys to. It's right where I wanted you to be. Because the first week we just sculpted some heads, and so we got our head around the problem of. In fact, let me draw on the screen. I can't say I always teach with a plan because I do so much teaching that if I worked from a plan all the time, I'd probably jump off of a cliff. But there is a grand scheme to all of it. And so let's see, let's do P and white. Okay, cool. So the first thing I really wanted you to get your head around is just the fundamental sculpting in ZBrush. And this is where you go a little bit of the medium, which in this case is ZBrush, versus kind of your expectations and your abilities. So that's really what we focused on the first week. And the face is the best place for people to hit up against expectations and abilities, because when you can't sculpt that nose the way you know a nose is supposed to be made, then it's pure frustration from that point on, or it's really how you deal with frustration from that point on. And that's really important because then we start to interface with the software program more directly. Okay, and we get the motivation for the next step, which is making ZBrush do what you want it to do. So the second week we got into sculpting, and we just did a bit of a low-key exercise for kind of the same thing, but it was a little lower key. You could have done a body, you could have done an insect, and we're just gaining mileage and working on this medium versus expectations. And so today we're going to get into brushes And we're going to start really honing into this idea of what can I expect ZBrush to do? What is the framework, that it's using? That's going to be really the key. So you've got the modules, the lecture. You've had that for this week, or you should have had that for this week. Let me know if you don't. And that you have to watch that because there is a lot of content in there. What I'm going to do right now is kind of riff on that a little bit while going into various features. If you have any specific things, feel free to put them in chat and I can see it. So I can make a little note and then adjust a demo for it and see if we can make it happen. So we're into brushes. And when we talk about brushes, we have to talk about the type. And the type equals the algorithm. Okay, if you watch the lectures, you'll know that the algorithm is ZBrush's specialty. That's Pixologic's specialty, I should say. They spend an enormous amount of time on that. I mean months of time. Like the clay brush, that's not something that just, randomly happened. Hey, let's create a clay brush. That was months of working on the algorithm. It grew out of the flattened brush and out of some of the failings of the flattened brush. But the clay brush has become the dominant brush inside of ZBrush. It's the dominant type. So you can say that in types there was really the standard brush, and now there's the clay brush. Clay is the evolution of the standard brush to an extent. Okay, the standard brush still does some things that clay does, that clay can't do, I should say. It's still, the standard brush is great for knives, it's great for low-res sculpting of some things, and depending on your technique, like if you watch Neville Page's earlier videos where you'll see him sculpt and then he'll smooth it down, or Zach Petrock, where they'll build up a form and then they'll smooth the form down. And they work from low res to high res. That can build really organic models very, very well. And that's all done with the standard brush. There's a lot of people using it, but still very powerful brush. But for the most part, almost all sculpting kind of moves over to the clay brushes. They're just too awesome. So we talk about algorithm, and so I'm going to start riffing and checking out what different algorithms do. The best thing for you and the thing that Pixologic would want you to do is just get in and start experimenting with them. I'm going to provide the framework, but you want to just get in and start to experiment. Okay, then we need to talk a little bit about settings. So there's type, there's settings. Okay, these are things like, let's see, brush mod. Depth is a setting. We've kind of already looked at depth. Samples. These are all settings. And these are settings that kind of sway a brush one way or another. So let me just remind you of that feature framework. Okay, remember we have loose sculpting at top. We have controlled at the bottom. We have soft form. And we have hard forms. Okay, this is really the whole arc of the sculpting experience. In a lot of ways, actually, this is the artistic experience. So you could analyze, Titian and Raphael and Rembrandt and de Kooning all kind of within this framework, because everything is some variant of hard, soft, and everything that we do is some variant of sketchy and loose versus tight and controlled. So in some levels you could say loose is Baroque, in some levels, or you could say, let's say Robert Henry, and if you know Robert Henry, art, spirit, and Frank Duveneck, if you know that guy. Oh my God, love his work. Or you get down here and you get down to Jean-Jacques Louis David. You get down into people that are working with these really controlled processes. Ancient sculpture, marble carving is controlled. You don't really marble carve loosely, unless you're Michelangelo after 70 years of sculpting. So everything kind of fits within this framework. But that done and said, the settings will move it one way or the other. Okay, they'll make it more suitable for hard, more suitable for soft. They'll make it more loose and more controlled. And really, one of the brushes that makes this really clear is the planer brush. You'll see the planer brush is really just a clay brush, and then with some settings, you come down here and it's a planer brush. It's really controlled. Really, really, really controlled. So controlled that it's alien to ZBrush. It was this big, huge splash in 3.5, I think, and then it quietly got removed so that there's only one brush left. And that's because it, it's hard to use. It's controlled, and ZBrush doesn't do controlled. So remember, I know you're going to watch the video, so I know you're going to see this, but remember, ZBrush started up here in this loose and soft. Remember, it is on a mission, not necessarily into the controlled. I wouldn't say that, but it is in a mission into loose and hard surface. It wants to own the top here. If it can allow you to create hard surface sculptures loosely, or semi-loosely, with a workflow, then it's going to really dominate the market for a long time to come. And that's the ultimate goal, because it means that it's providing the resources that artists need. It means it's getting that sweet spot. So settings are going to help determine that as well. And then not only that, but there's also workflows. So let me reiterate. There is, let's say type. I'm going to use common language. There's the type, there's the setting, and then there are workflows. Okay, workflows can help solve certain problems that a brush has by chunking things down into manageable steps. So try not to forget this word chunking. And watch when you sculpt. If you're not getting the right result from the brush, the result that you really want, one of the questions you need to ask yourself is, am I expecting too much out of that brush? Am I expecting it to do too much? I had that example this morning, or this afternoon, when I was preparing for this class, and I started using the blob brush to lay out some surface texture for concrete, and it just, it was okay like, let's say 7 years ago when I really developed the demo for it, but nowadays things are so realistic it just looked horrible, and nowadays it's just not the right brush for that kind of thing. So watch your expectations, chunk things down into smaller workflows. You'll see later on what I do to get concrete. Okay, let me look through questions and see if there's anything I need to adjust. Just reading things right now. Roberta says things are coming pretty fast. Okay. Riley, still feel a bit clumsy with transpose. Understand that. Kurt got confused last time when you talked about anatomy. Gotcha, Kurt. I understand. I have to be careful of that because the terminology is so crazy complicated. Let's see, Thomas. Okay. Photoshop as a baseline. All right, just reading. Thomas is always at, let's see. Matthew, I never used the clay brush as much before this class, but now I use it more often in conjunction with clay buildup. Okay, cool. Yeah, you can ask questions here. Don't worry about that. Catherine, your anatomy's old school. I know it's crazy that they change it. But it's crazy that they're still learning new anatomy. Catherine's saying she tends to use, I tend to use the newer terms. She knows the older ones. But it's crazy to me that they're still discovering these new things about our anatomy. A really good resource, if anybody just really wants to get up on the cutting edge of things, is, I forget how it's spelled. These things are, I'm dyslexic, so I and E may be reversed. But it's called the general, I'm not going to write this, the general musculoskeletal anatomy, I guess. But this is the publisher, and you'll find it. That has some of the cutting edge anatomy and terminology. Just reading. Okay. All right, guys. Nothing I need to change right now. So first, I'm going to start talking a little bit about algorithms. And you really need to watch the lectures. So I'm only going to go over this very briefly. But you can see the algorithm by the word base type. So if you look down to, let's see, does it? Okay, it won't. So I'm going to hold my cursor there, and I want you to look where this white dot is, and then I want you to look this white circle that I'm scratching in there. Look there for something called base type. Okay, Blob's base type is pump. It's the only brush that uses pump. So it should just be Blob technically, but you know, these things are developed differently. So when they're developing the algorithm, obviously they've got a working title. And then when they create a brush, they usually will create several brushes. And I'm going to show you some of those shortly. But clay buildup, or I mean, sorry, clay, base type is clay. Clay buildup, base type is clay. Clay tubes, clay. Okay, and then you get into the trim brushes. Look at that. Crease is a trim brush. Crumple, it's a nudge brush. Insert mesh, standard. Insert mesh, insert mesh, insert mesh, insert mesh. You can see tons of insert mesh, right? You don't have to use the insert mesh brushes they give. You can create your own. They just provide a base type. You can take any one of these and create another one. It's not a big issue there. There's a standard brush. Damien standard is standard. Notice you actually have Damien's URL there. So it's if you create one and it gets into ZBrush, great marketing. All right, let me check in. Roberto says my audio is coming in and out. Anybody else? Okay. Where are we getting feedback? Let's see. 2 seconds. Let me just see if I can solve that. Let's see. I'm going to do a quick speed test. Site seems to be coming up pretty quick. And let me check my computer. I've got almost 400 gigs free, so I'm fine there. $125 up. Huh? Seems to be okay here, guys. Proximity. The microphone's attached to my head, though. Okay. Which way do I turn? Which way do I turn? That. Huh. It's because I'm moving my head is what Nate says, guys. I have to move my head. Okay, let's get back to business. I'll try to move my head less. And if there's any issue, just shout out. I'm watching as things go, so I'm able to see right away if there's an issue. Okay. So insert mesh. Insert mesh. Notice there is a ton of insert meshes. They have just probably like 20 plus. Okay, then there's the move, then there's this displace type, then there's this polish type, and where's planar? Planar is a clay brush. That's going to be weird when you see that. Soft concrete, that's an elastic brush. What? Soft clay, that's an elastic brush. So these are the different algorithms for how the brush behaves, and really the algorithm is the ones and zeros of it. So what is it that an algorithm is processing? So let's get a few of the parameters. So first thing we got to know is that the brush has an area. Okay, and you can see, this is the brush size, so to speak. It's off the screen right now. But the brush size has a focal shift, which allows you to kind of make that a harder or a softer brush, because everything in between these circles basically is getting gradiated. It's getting smoothed out. It's kind of fading away. If you really want an alpha to show up, you need to set your focal shift really far towards negative 100 or something, negative 90 or something like that. And that'll help you get a really nice clean edge with no fall off. But the thing that you have to remember is that a brush is not a 3D plane. Let's do it this way. Let's give you some perspective lines. It's not just this circular disc. Okay, it is a sphere. So when your brush is touching the surface of your model, let's say it's touching the surface right there, it's calculating and working with all of the vertices within that sphere. All of the vertices are part of the calculation. Not all of them are affected. Okay, so you've got the sphere of influence. What is your sphere of influence? That could be a course. The sphere of influence of ZBrush. Master the sphere of influence and win no friends. Okay, now from here, different things affect it. Okay, of course, focal shift is probably one of the first things that affect it, because that means that now there's actually two circles, and everything from the inner circle to the outer circle is faded off, right? So everything from that inner to the outer, now we're going to lose everything that I'm going to outline in red here. I'm going to scribble in red. These are probably no longer going to be part of the calculation, so that's important to keep in mind. Okay, then the next thing that kind of happens is, what are your depth settings? Or, let's rephrase that. It's the, let's say the algorithm's behavior with depth. Because not all algorithms are going to treat depth the same. Clay brush, being a topology independent brush, does do some really interesting things with the polygons that are kind of way deep down here, right? Let me just, well, I don't want to erase that stuff yet. But the standard brush is not going to necessarily behave the same way. And then underneath this you have settings. Okay, and these settings you can actually see in the picker palette. These settings will adjust what a brush can do, with depth, so to speak. But each algorithm, again, has its own behavior. It has its own way of handling it. Some brushes will ignore everything that's not on the surface or not within a specific range of the surface. It's a cross-section, so to speak. That's called depth masking. I'm going to just write that down over here, because we are going to look at depth masking. How do you limit the effect of a brush to a cross-section? How could I get a brush to touch right here on the red dot, but affect the model way deep down inside? Can I do that? Yes, definitely. That's called depth masking. So there's a lot of stuff that happens. The algorithm has its way of handling depth, and then settings alter that. You could think of settings as basically, if you're doing web programming, they're an API into it, but they're just an API into the algorithm, you know, within a very specific interface, no custom programming. So every one of these things is relevant. Let's take a look at what these settings really are. So we know right off the bat, we've already kind of looked at the curve, and the curve relates to some of the experience that you've seen in Z intensity. So the result of the curve, or what the curve does, is really just affect how things fade off and how alphas are going to be imprinted within that shape. The next thing you've got is depth. And depth is this sphere of influence that you're able to move inside or above the model or place it right on the surface. And then there are samples. And make sure you check out the lecture on samples, because samples will explain how when ZBrush encounters a crazy surface like this, if your draw size is huge, how does it sample the different normals? Or if your draw size is small, how is it going to respond as the surface changes? What happens if the surface changes quickly, like if it comes in and does something like that? What is your brush going to do as it moves? How does it flip as it's sampling all these different normals? Okay, that's all stuff that gets handled inside here. Okay, elasticity is really specifically for the move elastic brush. Fiber mesh, this is very specific. This is a connection into the fiber mesh system. So this allows you to have brushes that you can basically comb hair with, so to speak. So you can see it here in these groom brushes. They all have fiber mesh settings. Otherwise, if it's not a fiber mesh brush, you're not going to see that. Twist, orientation, these are all things that affect the alpha. Surface, random modifiers, things like tilt, brush strength, modifier, trails, you know, insert mesh stuff is right here. So all of that is insert mesh properties. So they put all the insert mesh properties there instead of creating another tab. Mostly, I'm sure, because they weren't quite sure if this was going to be a very powerful addition just yet or not. So it'll no doubt get its own tab at some point. Masking. So similar to the masking that you have on a tool, the brush has its own masking. Tablet pressure. This is a really important one. Brush behavior is very significant here. If you get into painting in Photoshop or something like that, you know the brush behavior in Photoshop, you have to modify it. This works in concert with in preference. There is tablet. The preference settings are older. The brush settings are newer. So these are just generic settings that say, you know, let's make the sensitive. Let me explain it this way. So first thing, Pixologic, let's say brush pressure. So brush pressure in a Cintiq, in a Intuos is 0 to 1024, right? And what that setting of 0.75 is doing is just determining and helping determine how does the curve relate between, let's say, this is a little complicated, Z intensity and brush pressure. How hard are you pressing, and how much intensity of your brush is that going to give? So in the beginning, this was such a simple setting. It was just 0.75. There wasn't a curve that you could put in there at all. Okay, but now that has changed, because if you've got a brush that you want to adjust, you just go in here to global, you go into size, and then you can say change that curve, make it broader. You can do a lot of different things. You can change the size, the relationship to Z intensity, to coloring if you're doing coloring, brush mod, brush embed, all that stuff. A lot of cool things that you can do there. Let me switch over to the standard brush. I'll do a quick demo of that. So I'm going to use global settings. I'm going to start light and go hard and then go light. Okay. This is what we're going to be focused on. Do you want that to taper more or not? Let's turn global settings off. Start light, press hard, end light. It's already a little different. It's hard to see it, I think, but it's already a little different with the default. It doesn't have that lump. Now, let's leave that, and I'm going to divide this so we get a little bit more. And let's see if we can really push this. So light, push hard, and light. All I did is change that intensity, and you can see how thin it gets at the top and how thin it gets at the bottom. I changed how the brush size relates. So the brush size is smaller, 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 as opposed to here it starts out quite large, right? Very large. Then it goes small, small, and then it gets the same size, and then it gets smaller quicker. And what did I do? I dropped the size from right there, dropped it to the very bottom, and I made it ramp really fast. If we turn that back off, light. Do I have a... Okay. So now we're seeing not quite as sharp. Because of that fall off. So tablet pressure can be quite useful. Let me turn that back to global. And in fact, anytime you're adjusting brushes, you may need to come in and just say reset them all. And I've definitely been adjusting them. So I just reset them to their basic parameters. If you do that and you created a custom brush, it will delete it, if I remember right. So you have to make sure that you save brushes. So check this out. You can load a brush. These are different brush presets I have. Here's a mech plate. Let's go open. What is that? It's from some class. It's a specific type of insert mesh. I'm just going to delete my lower. And I was using this to create mech stuff. If you go to Lightbox, you go to Brush, you see a ton of these guys. That's a lot of different brushes, right? But let me just show you where those really are. So if you go to Pixologic folder, ZBrush 4R6, and then you go into the ZBrush folder. So here's the main folder. Then you go into ZBrushes. That's where you're going to see all of these folders are basically these folders. And you may want to look at them here because it's just a little easier to go from one to the other. what this, like 8 curve brushes. Mallet, I made mallet a long time ago. That's my guy. Then there's patterns, 6 patterns, 9 scale brushes, or something close to 9. 3 different stitch brushes. Those might be mine. Trails. There's a wood. There's 2 wood planks. There's 5 insert brushes. Insert ear, mesh, insert teeth, insert ring, all that stuff. So there's literally just an insane amount of brushes hanging out here. And they had to move everything into these folders because, quite simply, this was getting too huge. It was just too much stuff going on there. So they had to move things off. But it gives you a sense of how much flexibility there is. There's just an enormous amount of possibility with these brushes and with this kind of brush system. Let me check in real quick on questions because I saw a whole bunch. Depth masking, that's a good question. We'll wait and get there. Mark is asking, depth is kind of the depth of the center of the brush inside or outside the model. It does not have to do with buildup. Okay, let me see if I understand that. Mark, depth is kind of the depth of the center of the brush inside. So let me make this a little clearer. Let's talk about depth. Excuse me, I'm going to cough here. Okay. Let's talk about depth right now. Let's get a little clear on depth. I want to make sure you're there and ask me questions because this is the moment in which I can address them with you. So first what I want you to do is notice a similarity. So there is a circle for the brush and there's a circle in the depth. The black line that you see here and the dot represent the surface of the model and the dot. So in general, your brush's depth setting, so to speak, will be the surface. It will always be the surface. In general, okay? There are settings that can change that. One of those settings is picker and depth. Notice that it says continuous Z. So I'm in the picker palette, I've got the depth setting set up and it's got continuous Z on. So what continuous Z means is that as it samples the surface, it will move the brush higher or lower according to the skin of the model. So right now depth is right there. As I move down, depth is going to drop down, go back up, drop down, go back up, drop down. So it's always going to be at the top. But there is a moment where you can say, well, look, I don't want this brush to continuously sample depth. I want it to pick depth only once. You're only going to pick the depth once, and that's when I click. First click I make. So click. This is going to, let me go back here. And I want to pick, let's say clay buildup. No, BCT, clay tubes. Okay. So as my brush moves, it's continuously sampling depth and adding and moving up and down and up and down. So it's moving up and down, up and down, up and down. Okay, the algorithm kind of mitigates things up here at the top a little bit. That's what it's designed to do. It's designed to kind of take the bottom stuff, the bottom topology, and pull that up to the top first. That's an example of how an algorithm deals with different sides of depth differently. In the clay brush, it samples everything within its sphere of influence, and the areas that are at the bottom, those get more weight, so to speak, than the areas that are at the top. So the areas within the top of that sphere of influence, they're not going to get as affected. Their behavior is not, their modification is not as weighted to them. It's weighted to things at the bottom. Let me stop there for a second, because I know that's quite complicated. Any questions about that? Or Mark, does that make sense to you, how an algorithm will weight things that are at the bottom part of that sphere of influence more than things that are at the top of that sphere of influence?
Yeah, Ryan, we're getting a little delay in the screen. That's what we're seeing. Seems like it's a little behind.
Oh. Why? Let me check.
Might be good now. It may have just been a temporary thing.
No, nothing's ever temporary. Hold on one sec, guys. Okay, we found the culprit, guys. Internet connection should be better. Give me 1 second to have this thing confirmed. Can you hear me? Testing? Yeah. Let's just wait for 1 second. Lewis's computer needs to come back on. There we go. Any radio static you had should be gone now. Okay. We were on the same internet connection, sharing a very ancient internet connection, which was not good. Okay. Okay. Looking through questions. Okay. All right, so we've covered depth to death, so to speak. Except for Catherine, depth literally functions as if it were affected by the gravity of the model. You could say that, but the thing is depth is relative to the center. It's relative to the surface normal. So gravity, of course, would be straight up and down, but in our case, depth is relative to this the surface of the model, which technically speaking is actually how gravity would work. If we were a tiny person on this planet, you know, it would all be moving towards the center. And funny enough, gravity is inside of the depth setting. So they just changed the orientation, so to speak. Okay. Okay. Let's do a quick summary, guys, just so I make sure my brain is definitely fried after trying to figure that one out. So we talked types, settings, workflows. Okay, we looked at the different types. Okay, we haven't explored them yet. We just kind of looked at them. We've explored some settings. And then we talked a little bit about depth to get that a little bit clearer. But there's some great lectures on this stuff that I really want you guys to view. And then, of course, internet issue. So that took us into about 45 minutes. Let's get into some stuff. Let's get into some actual behavior and some examples. So we're going to do kind of a classic example. So let me just sketch this out in an outline. We're going to take a simple column. And we're going to just mess with this column, start to learn what we can do with the brush and how we can kind of make this look like old concrete, how we can carve holes into it, what settings become important, how does picker become important, how does clay tubes differ from clay buildup, what are the settings there, how can depth affect this, okay, what happens if we go to a planer brush, how does the alpha affect all of this stuff. We're going to just start to experiment it and put everything within the context of kind of playing to see what we can get. Okay, before I do that, let me just make sure that audio is still good. So you don't have to answer, I'm just looking through your questions and see if there was any issues. Okay, cool. T-Laws, you mentioned screen flipping. Not sure what that means. If that screen is flipping, there should be no flipping of the screen at all. All right, so I'm going to go into Lightbox, Tool, I'm going to go into Image Plane, and I'm going to load a polycube. This is where you get the cube. It's Tool, Image Plane, Polycube. And it's a tool, so it gets added to my project. Now I'm going to go to my polyframe. And I'm going to lower my subdivision levels so they get back down to 1, and I'm just going to delete the higher. Okay, then I'm going to use the Move brush, which I've set up on a hotkey. And we've got to establish symmetry. So I'm going to press X on the keyboard, and so now I got symmetry here and here. But I want to have symmetry in all 4 planes. So this is my X-axis. This is my Z-axis, and this is my Y-axis. Why did I make that look like a 4? I don't know. Okay, how do I know that? Because I've been using ZBrush forever. That's how. So X, Z, and Y. The other thing is you can see the floor. The floor is almost always set on the Y-axis, so you can't really see that, but you'll see this. I'm just going to temporarily make that for you. You see this Y up at the top, and you'll see this kind of grayed out Z and X. So the Y is the one that's active, and then anything sitting on top of that, we kind of know how that works. But you can also see kind of this orientation gimbal there. Most of the times, I'm just going to be straight with you, I know orientation by simply knowing that I've put this in X. So that's where I know that is. Z is there. And I'm just pulling up. Cool. So I have a very simple poly cube, no subdivision levels. If I go in to divide this guy right now, it's going to divide down into an oval. That is not going to work for what I need. I need to turn SMT off. I need to divide it once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. Sometimes you need to turn polyframe on and back off to actually see the subdivisions. And then I can turn smooth on and I can divide it and divide it. Now hover your cursor over the model and you'll see that polys equals 98,304. So go ahead and take a look before I change the screen. Polys equal 98,304. You'll know that by hovering over it, or depending on your interface, you'll see it right there. In my interface on this older Cintiq, broadcasting at 1280, and I broadcast at 1280 not because I like that, but it's because of the connection, the internet connection. That's the fastest way to get it to you guys. So in this case, I don't see it, but I hover over it and I see it. Same thing, 98,304. Polyframe. Okay. So now we've divided it. We've got some stuff to work with. Let's get in and use our brush clay buildup. I'm going to turn symmetry off, and let's turn perspective on, and let's see if we can sculpt something. So let's break this guy up. You know what? That's too raggedy. I'm going to divide this one more time. There, about 400,000. And why not just one more time? There, 1.5 million. Still cuts into it, but I get more detail. So what I'm doing right now is just cutting away, and I'm trying to kind of create some nice edges and get a sense that this has kind of been eroded away. I might try to build up, see if I can make that happen. But one of the things that you'll start to notice is that it's just kind of too loose. It's kind of lumpy, right? And I want a workflow that's going to kind of resemble what concrete would look like if you're chipping it. I mean, shouldn't there be some kind of striations and chipping? So there should be some chipping mechanism in there. Wouldn't it be great if there was an ability to kind of easily render, all the different layers getting chipped out? Well, there is. And this is where we kind of get in and we start to explore some of the limitations of clay buildup and some of the advantages of the other clay brushes. So clay buildup, we already know this is a great brush. It's fantastic. But as I kind of add form in here and start to pull away, let's be clear about the behavior, and then I'm going to go into the solution. So everything kind of rounds out, and that's because in terms of picker orientation, it's continuously orientating. So that means that as this surface normal changes, the nature of this brush is to create a rounder surface. The continuous orientate, which means it's continuously changing its direction, and you can see that. See how it's changing its orientation right now. Combined with the algorithm's depth behavior means that you're usually going to get a very nice, clean, rounded surface. That's what it's supposed to do. That's why we use it for the face. That's one of the primary reasons we use it for the face. But let's switch our brush to just clay tubes. Okay? I'm not going to change anything right now. I'm just going to switch to clay tubes and see if I can get a little bit of a different result. So I'm going to press Alt, and I do get a slightly different result. It does help create striations a little bit differently. And I am noticing that I can get an edge to the chipping that I simply was not getting with clay buildup. Does anybody want to take a gander at why I'm getting this kind of edge with clay tubes and I did not get the edge with clay buildup? What would be the one feature that changes that? Could it be the alpha? They're both topologically independent, and look at that, they both have the exact same alpha. Polygon normals not being respected. Continuous sampling. Steve has it. It's continuous sampling. In samples, you see a feature that says build up. That is the primary difference between clay tubes and clay buildup. Notice that clay buildup has it on. If you hover over control, you'll actually get a bit of an explanation of it, so you can always use that. But basically what buildup means is, let's say, how do I do this? Let's do the white line equals the surface, the, what would be, no, let's do it that way. The white line is going to equal the starting surface. And then as I come in with my brush and I start to, let's say, push in a surface, the clay buildup will continuously sample the new depth. So I will continuously be able to kind of push deeper and deeper into this with just one brush stroke. All I got to do is I just got to run it back and forth. Back and forth, 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 and it will continuously move it down. I'm going to demo that right now. Clay buildup. I'm going to press, let's do it right here in the corner. I'm just going to press Alt. I'm going to dig back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Look how deep that gets. Very, very, very deep, right? I'm going to undo that. I'm going to select the clay tubes brush. I'm going to try to do the same thing. Alt, back and forth, 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 and what happened? It took the surface and it pushed it down, but there was a limit to how far it would push down. Once it reached that limit, it stopped. And that limit became the new surface. End of story. You could brush back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and it would not change. So build up means it's continuously sampling. The other way, and this will make actually a little bit more sense because of the name. Let's use clay buildup again. I'm going to now, instead of pushing in, I'm going to add. There we go. And so notice that I took one surface and I was able to continuously build that up until it became something else. All while just taking a brush back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I was able to continuously build it up. And that's the build-up feature. And it's kind of, you know, the clay brush itself was designed with this feature in mind, because when Ofer was telling me about this brush, he said it's really like laying on a strip of clay. That's what they were designing it for, and you know, that's what it is. Clay tubes was as far as we got with ZBrush 3.5. And you'll notice with clay tubes, if I try to do that, let's do it this way. So boom, 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 boom. I'm just hitting a wall. Like it will add, but it stops at a certain point. So what determines that depth? Anybody want to take a guess? Roberto? But that behavior is controlled by depth, right? Now, what determines the height of this stroke? What determines that limit where the brush itself just hits this, clay tubes hits this brush, and that's it. It's just at the end of that stroke. We've got some great answers. Z intensity is the one that people will almost always think is the determining factor. And so I'm going to test this out. I'm not going to answer it. I'm just going to test, right? It's super easy. So let's set our Z intensity to 3 or 4. Notice that it's taking me longer to build up the surface, but I still reach a limit. It took longer, but I still reached a limit. Z intensity up at 80. I got to that limit really quick, but I was not able to go past it. So here I'm going to build. I'm just going to do this for like about another 10 seconds so that you really get it. I'm brushing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And no matter what I do, there's a height. And that's it. That's the end of the story. So what's setting that height? Roberto has it. Renato's got it. Beruz has it. It's depths, guys. Renato had it. It's depth and something else but depth. So let's check this out. Right now you see my depth in bed is set to 10. Let me set my depth in bed to 100. There you go. And because my Z intensity was quite high, it zoomed up. See my Z intensity? Let me lower that Z intensity. And there it's going slower, but you can see it's starting to reach that ceiling, and that's where it starts to get those hard edges, right? I can extend the island, but I can't raise the island more than that depth setting. Unless I increase the depth in bed, and we should just use the proper term, unless I increase in bed, or unless I increase the draw size. Draw size and in bed combine to equal height. So these guys define these parameters for us. Any questions? Now, while I'm waiting for some questions, I want to ask another one. How would you phrase what Z intensity does? Is Z intensity the most important, or is embed the most important? I just want to see what you would answer. Kurt's asking, does that create a specific measurement? And the answer is there is nothing specific, like if you were talking real-world units about this. Nothing specific yet. Roberto says depth embed controls the height. Build-up controls the height as well. Build-up just says you can build multiple stories in your building. Height says, okay, each story is going to be 15 feet. My ideal height. John says, draw size impacts the height only because the sphere of influence is larger. Well, we would need to get into the algorithm per se to get exactly that. I like to just think of embed and draw size as multipliers of each other. But John, that actually really just goes to what you say. It impacts the height only because the sphere of influence is larger. But I'm always careful of drawing conclusions that we don't really have data for, and they're not going to give us the algorithm per se. Okay, Thomas, I hear you. No, Thomas, we can make it happen. Renato, embed, yeah. I'm just going through questions one more time. Mark, you've got a really great point, and I think when we get down to this level of discussion, it becomes a bit more of how do I say it? It's talking about the same thing, but at different levels, so to speak. So a lot of times when I'll be talking about a feature, I'm putting it in a little bit more easy language. But you might be inside your mind getting much more into the algorithm and talking about, say, maybe the brush. For example, there's the brush here, but then in the algorithm, the brush sinks itself down, and then it knows that it's got this sphere of influence, and then it's got to push out here, and so we get into the algorithm. So I think your conjecture is right on, and it just has to do with us speaking at different points, or different levels, I should say. Catherine phrased, she says, Z intensity is the rate. So I want to get back to this question of what does Z intensity do? And what does embed do? And so I'll give you a real simple metaphor. Embed determines the absolute maximum speed of your car. Z intensity is going to determine how fast you can get from 0 to 60, or 0 to 150. Or whatever the maximum speed at that particular point. Or let's just say how fast you want to go. And then Z intensity will determine, what's your torque, how fast you're getting off that line. So good. I'm glad I'm glad this makes sense. And yeah, there is another way of looking at embed is bounding box. These are just metaphors for us, and it's important to find the metaphor that works for you so that it sticks in your brain. But I feel comfortable everybody's got a clear sense of this. If not, do not hesitate to email. Rafi, I'm reading yours right now. Is embed applied to a single pin click when you move to pin up and right again? Ah, yes. Great question, Rafi. Let me demo. Exit. Undo. Okay, let's go into clay tubes. Rafi's asking about the difference between, like, how does it know to use this number? So with clay tubes, if you do not have buildup on, then you first will go up to a certain height, and then you have to lift your pin and click again to get higher. Lift the pin, click again, and lift the pin and click again. So every time you remove your pin, ZBrush resamples. It basically throws out the sample information. It says, oh, the height is up here now. So now we're going to go up. Build up, which we have in the sample, ignores that step and says basically every time somebody goes back over a polygon, it's going to sample that depth, goes back over it, goes back over it, goes back over it. So in the beginning, we had clay tubes, and you had to do this. And then clay buildup really rounded that clay brush out, really rounded that feature out, so that clay tubes is really the dominant brush that people use today. And then finally, to just continue this point, to prove this, I'm going to take clay tubes, I'm going to turn buildup on, and brush back and forth, and what do you know? We've got ourselves a clay buildup brush. Only difference is that feature. And I mentioned this in the last practicum that I had. Every time I get a new version of ZBrush, I have to spend a week or more, and with the way they develop these things, that week is often, barely enough time. And I have to go from brush to brush to brush and say, what's changed? What's the difference? So What's the difference between clay? Does a sample change? No. Does a sample change with clay buildup? No. Does it change? No. The only thing that changes between clay buildup, clay tubes, and clay is that alpha and the buildup right there. And I triangulate what are the common changes. It's just it's what I advise you to do when you get a new version of ZBrush as well. They will make slight modifications to things like clay, but they will not make major modifications. Mostly, they will add new brushes, and then you've got to go through and figure out, hey, what's this preserve edge do? Things like that. So let me continue with this demo. I went a little longer than that than I expected, but I think thanks to you guys, we got into a lot of great depth. No pun intended. Okay, so I want to do this again over here. I'm going to go into clay buildup, and I'm going to real quickly just kind of see if I can get something in. And notice clay buildup has the size of your brush is quite, it's always large. I would like the ability to have a smaller brush and then press. Okay, and I don't really want to go too deep. Okay, let me see if I can get something. So this looks quite ugly. And very, it just looks not good. So if I was doing this morning, I had this kind of pain of conscience where it's like, oh, it's so amateur, Ryan. And then I forgot it's all about workflow. It'd been a while since I sculpted a column, so I didn't have that frame of mind yet. But this is all about workflow. This is the first step. I'm going to press B on the keyboard for the brush pop-up, C for clay, T for tubes. Okay, and I want to use clay tubes. Let's get into actually making this function, because now I need to change a few things. This is kind of cool. I can see that I can pull out these patches, but one of the problems I have is that it's still very soft. You see how soft that is? It's not as soft as it was before, and then this gets kind of soft, and I'm dealing with a rigid natural surface, so I need to get past that. One of the things I can do right off the bat is I go into the picker palette and I open up orientation, and I just say, I want you to once orientate. So that means that the very first time you click on the surface, that's going to be your orientation. So let's take a surface right here. Notice I'm going to draw. That red line represents the surface normal. And then let's pick another one. And then this red line, surface normal. So we're going to treat those two surfaces, see what happens. I'm going to press Alt. And then notice how I am dragging that brush. I dragged that brush basically into a plane that was going the entirely different direction. And because I dragged it into the plane, it extended the orientation of that green plane. It just cut it right in. Because my orientation was fixed, so my sphere of influence, this little white dot, or white circle, just was constantly on the move in one direction. They're real powerful, all right? So that's cool. Let's pick this way and press Alt. Let's make sure, do I have build up on? No. Oh, but my depth is too high. That's what that was. Let's set my depth really down low to like 5. Now it increases the intensity. Back up. There we go. There we go. Now I'm making progress. I'm going to smooth these guys out. Pressing Shift, I can always get in there and adjust. This is a little better to me. I can start to get striations. But I still get kind of softened planes. So if I really want striations, as in I want one orientation for all of these guys, and I want that orientation to be consistent, you know, step ladder like, I got to do something different. I got to go into Picker, and instead of once oriented, I'm just going to click on this arrow, drag to the surface so it's looking right at me, and then everything is going to be orientated. See how I'm getting that step ladder now? So this is a little nicer. And now suddenly I can see complexity happening here, and it's just a little bit nicer. You can rotate the model, and it's still, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but when I've, let me see how to explain this. The normal right now is facing right at us. So that means that if we were to be examining this, let's say right now, everywhere in ZBrush we're in a cube, right? Now, we're going to look at that cube from above and to the side, and you'll see like this green line that I'm drawing in here. This represents our 0 depth. It's the center. Okay. Technically speaking, there's 4,000 units of depth, front and back. ZBrush units of depth, front and back. And the green plane represents 0. Now, normal that we have right now is basically facing straight towards us. But you can rotate your model within that. And that normal will still be facing another way. So it's just, you get to, it's like keeping your hand in a certain orientation with the knife tool, and then you rotate the clay model to kind of adjust the cut, so to speak. So that's one way. But the other thing, I don't talk a lot about this in the lectures or very much at all anymore. But what I just drew you right there, what I drew on the screen, is a breakdown of ZBrush's world space. Remember, ZBrush is a benevolent dictatorship, and now you know the limits of that benevolent dictatorship. It's roughly 4,000 units in front, roughly 4,000 units in back, and then these dimensions across and down, this is really just, you know, width and height of your canvas. Okay, and these guys you set in document. So this is going to be 1024 or something like that, you know, whatever gets set. One thing to note is that ZBrush will on the fly change the width and height. It's going to make it as small as it can, but fill up this entire viewer. It'll fill up that entire viewer. So if I was to load a new project right now, it would fit it to this size. If I was to load a project now, it would be much taller than it is wide. And I would have to close one of these guys, reload the project to have it open up differently. But here you can see the height is 866 and 774. I'm going to take one tangent. I don't like to do tangents because it's messy in our brain. But if you come in here into lights, let me see if I can find it. Not light caps, it's the older part of the matrix. You can see these placement dots. And then I clicked the P and I moved out. Notice that that goes to 4 as soon as I hit the back of that canvas. But then it's some variant of, some variant of 0, 0.29, and then that goes back in space, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Ooh, yeah, there we go. Now we're going into positives, negatives. This gives you it's kind of a neat little XYZ to give you a sense of where something is in space. You can also see that kind of thing, I think, in not preview shadows. Did they remove it? Fog. There you go. Depth in the back, depth in the front. Depth in the back, depth in the front. Totally different measurement. It does not match up with the light, so you don't get a nice mathematical equation. But it's kind of neat for you to just, let me reiterate, for you to have a sense of how ZBrush's world is constructed, and that we are within this plane with a certain amount of space this way and a certain amount of space that way. That'll also tell you why ZBrush sizes the model itself, and that's because if they're only calculating 4,000, 4,000 in any one direction, you can't allow real-world units in unless you scale them to fit within some parameter, some size. Now, technically speaking, this may all change in the future. When they upgrade to 64-bit, they have to rewrite a whole bunch of stuff. This may get rewritten, and they may have a real 3D world units. It's 100% possible. Okay, let me check questions because I went on a tangent, and I want to make sure I'm answering things. Kurt, can embed be set scaled to ZBrush units on the grid? Kind of not. And I would not advise any efforts to get real-world units there. That would be a recipe for some frustration. It may be possible with some tools, but I can't think of anything right now. Thomas, please show how to get to these build-up submenus. My screen is different and got lost. Thomas, of course. You go into the brush palette. You go into depth, and it's right there. Hope that helps. Rodrigo, can you customize your UI and put build-up wherever? Yes, you can. I used to have it down here when I didn't understand what it did as clearly as I do now. Matthew, this is where Dynamesh comes in, yeah. Explain the arrow, please. Sorry, Catherine, which arrow? Oh, okay. The arrow is orientation. So in this particular case, well, because I'm using my draw tool, it's switched, but you saw the arrow pointing that way. So I've changed the arrow so it's orientating that way, and that means that everything I brush is going to go in that direction. So you see how it's changing that orientation? This is a really cool way to get ledges, by the way. You see how I'm doing this to kind of jack this up a little bit and say, oh, this is neat. Did I lose my my pin sensitivity? No. Okay, now with that kind of done and looking a little bit, unfortunate, we can subdivide, or we can Dynamesh this if we want to, and in fact, let's do that. Let's Dynamesh this, geometry, Dynamesh, and I'm going to Dynamesh it kind of high. And I'm not going to freeze subdivision levels. It's really not worth it for this. But note that I do have, I'll stop talking, sorry. If you can hear me, it's just going to take 1 second. It's taking longer than a second. do have Dynamesh high. ZBrush is taken over. One moment. Steady. I'll stop it in a second, but it's really gonna... I don't want to talk during this because that's a recipe for disaster. All right, let me give it a second. That went up to 3 million. I'm stronger than I thought. That's going to be too much, guys, so I'm going to undo that. And let's not use Dynamesh at that resolution. Okay. Dynamesh, I got some problems, so I'm going to undo. Dynamesh again. Well, for the sake of this, I don't need it. So let's avoid it. And let's go back into the work, which is clay tubes with a low embed. Embed is set to 5. You can also set that embed to 0 and see what you can get away with. And then let's just go into once orientate. It's really wise to do this when you're pressing Alt. Okay, and there's other ways that we can kind of clean this form up as well. So those are what I want to look at next. Okay. So we talked about orientation. We talked about depth. Let me check questions, and then I want to go into something called H-polish. T-Laws and Rodrigo asking about 64-bit. We heard some good news from Paul Gabry. They are most likely, I mean, there is going to be some 64-bit support in the next version. Steve, how does zooming around and changing view affect the ZBrush world? It doesn't. That's like a box, and everything, and basically we rotate things inside that box. Oh, thanks, Mark, for posting that thing about thing from Matthew. Don't know if you guys know Matthew. Matthew runs support at Pixlogic. He did it. He was there before I was. Really great guy. John, yeah, I hold Shift down and it snaps. Thomas, how do you reset a brush? You go to Brush, reset all brushes. Got the thin side. What key are you using for embed? Let me show you something. If you ever need to know what a hotkey is assigned to a feature, you just go to the feature and hover. And you'll see that it has, in this case, it's brush, embed, and I is the hotkey. Georgie, you cannot control, ZBrush doesn't take pin tilt into effect as far as I know. Not like in Photoshop where it actually indicates the tilt. I know that's something that people would want. Okay. Let's get in and start talking about cleaning this thing up. And let's switch out of this kind of plastic material. There we go. I want to show you a brush, a very specific brush that's going to indicate another feature that's really relevant. What time are we at? We're at 5, so an hour and 2, hour and a half. Okay, it's called the H polish brush. So I'm just going to go da 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 da. Where's H? Where's H? Oh, I passed H. Where did H go? H polish. It's the only brush of its kind. You can also just press B for your brush pop-up, and then you just press H on the keyboard, and you get it. Now, before I show you what this does, what type is it? Well, it's a polish. So let's select a polish brush as well. There's a polish. That's a polish type. Let's check out this brush first. Okay, I'm just going to brush for a bit, and then we're all going to discuss what the heck this brush is doing. Brushing up and down, 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 up and down. I'm going to brush up and down, 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 up and down. It's very close to what clay brush does. Very close. Let me draw. So before I used polish brush, we had all of these changes in surface orientation, right? And then there was the track of my brush, which I'm going to say is in the white line, and then I'm going to do sphere of the brush is that green oval. What the polish brush did is it took all of the vertices within that brush and it sampled them. Those that were lower, it moved towards the top, avoiding the, it did not adjust that top layer very much at all. In fact, it tried to move everything up to the height of that top. But it did something a little different than the clay brush did. Let's do clay. The clay brush is really designed to just kind of really roughly fill everything in. So you get these little bits of pieces left in there. But the polish brush is like another layer above clay brush. The polish brush is designed to try to get to a flat surface. It's not just filling the surface in. It's not just, you know, throwing in some clay in there and saying, hey, all right, we're done. We layered that in, you know. Like, you know, say a cheap construction team that just comes in and builds a wall, throws some spackle on it, doesn't sand it down or anything like that. That's the clay brush. The polish brush, that's the good team. You know, you have to pay an extra $1,000 for them, but they're going to sand that down and give it a nice smooth surface. That's what polish does. That's why it's called polish, because it's polishing the surface. But it's got a lot of work to do, so it does the clay brush work and then adds polish on top of that. It is very, very close to the clay brush. Who has seen this brush used before? Let me ask you that. Mark is asking, polish tries to clean up edge topology. Yeah, I would say it doesn't really try to clean up topology as an animator might think, as in trying to kind of keep it from being overlapped or anything like that per se. But let's just say it does. It does. You know what? Let's test it, Mark. I love these detailed questions. Let's test it and get the actual answer. And it's good because we have some of these surfaces here that are really jaggedy. So we can figure out if it has a relax function. Yeah, Catherine, it's a cross between trim and clay. Yeah, so people have seen H polish used. Okay, polish was designed, remember our feature framework, I can tell you right where polish was designed. So this is soft, this is hard, and this is loose. Polish is moving this way. It's designed to do vehicles, mech stuff, smooth, rounded curves, like think Corvette, well, any Corvette except for those 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. Think nice edge, Stingray, 1974, the ones that don't work. That's what it's really designed for. All right, so let's put Mark's question to the test. We answered it in chat, but I'm always ready to be proved wrong. So how am I going to do this? I need to do a couple of things first. Can't really see these things. So let's go into Preference and PF Gray, Fill, no, let's lower that, and Saturation, and I'm going to increase the poly frame. There we go. That's too much. And that will take forever. That's not working. I do not want variable. Okay, guys, this is not necessarily going to broadcast very well because of the density. I'm going to go down one subdivision level. Let's go down 2 subdivision levels. There we go. We may have problems broadcasting this, but we'll do a recap. So the question is, does polish clean up any of this topology? And my hypothesis, or the hypothesis we have here is that the polish brush relaxes the surface and avoids overlaps. So let's test it. Okay. Did you guys see that in real time, or did it chunk up? Because that's the kind of thing that GoToWebinar does not like. Lots of black and white screen lines. That is not a friend. So let's get rid of that before we go any further. There we go. I'm going to give it 2 seconds for GoToWebinar to get its broadcasting together. Okay, probably fine by now. All right, there was no relax function that I could find. Really, what it seemed to do is just move things up with a slight bit of a curve, but it did not relax these jagged edges. Okay, and the reason why I'm mentioning that in this particular context is later on you'll learn about a relax feature. Oops, if I'm not doing that at 1,000,000 polygons. I'm going to stop talking now. This takes a moment. Okay, so this relaxed with projection, so there's some problems with that. That's not quite what I wanted to show you guys. There we go. And that had to do with it not being at the highest resolution level and all this other stuff. But what I do want to mention is notice that there is a polish feature here under deformation. There is an inflate, there is a smooth, there is a noise, and there's a gravity. Those are all features that you also see here in brushes. You see we have an inflate brush, wherever it is. We have gravity. We have a noise brush. We have a smooth brush. We have a polish brush. If it's off to the right over here, that means that it is what you might call an offline operation, which means it's not going to happen in real time. It's not going to happen at 60 frames per second, because if it's over here, it has to happen at 60 frames a second. It has to be optimized, and it has to be able to happen in real time, faster than a game engine. 60 frames a second. What you'll notice, and why I said that, is because inflate moved over here. Smooth moved over here. Polish was done here first and then moved off to this side. Relax is something that can move over here, where as you sculpt, it relaxes the surface. In time, some things like that happen. So you'll see this back and forth, and that's kind of important because the deformation palette and brushes are two ways to do the exact same thing. Make form. That's it. So you'll use them, interchangeably at times, and in other times, they have their own specific function. Okay. So polish. We saw what polish does. Polish is kind of like it's a very good clay brush. And Catherine, polish is like self-leveling gel. Absolutely. Hands down, I can't beat that. That's perfect. It is definitely self-leveling. Clay is, it's not a pomade or self-leveling gel per se. It's more like wax. You're just kind of chunking it in there, to use Behruz's word of the day, chunking, one more time. Okay. Let me go up. In my subdivision levels, lots of trouble. That's the polish brush, by the way. That's me doing something at a lower level. And it's kind of cool for volcanic stuff. But let's undo. There we go. And I want to undo all of that polish. There we go. Okay. So now we looked at polish. Let's take a look at H-polish. And I'm going to run H-polish over the same surface. What is the one difference with H-polish? That's the fact, you know what, I'm going to press Alt so that it's going the same direction. Definitely stronger and definitely plainer. H-polish is about this one feature. I've got my cursor over it. Preserve edge. That one feature is the primary feature for H-polish. If you turn that off, set that down to 0, what do you know? It behaves just like the planer brush. Stronger though. There's another setting in here that's making it stronger. Let me see if I can find it real quick, because I haven't actually looked for it. This is it. Trails. Let's put that to the test. Polish, set to 1. You see it's slower. Let me set my trails to 5. There we go. Polish is stronger, or with trails on. So let's say there's two settings that are relevant. There's trails and there's preserve edge. So preserve edge is set to 30 now, and what that means is that anywhere that it encounters a hard surface, it's going to try to keep that edge. Okay, I'm going to reset the brushes real quick. It's not behaving quite the way I wanted it to. B and H, there we go. There we go. It's the same brush, but now the way this works, lower your draw size, and you get a nice clean edge out of that. This is great for mech stuff. What happens if you put an alpha on there? I think there was an alpha I wanted to try. Let's say alpha 58. How many polygons are we at? Yeah. Let's move down here. Well, it's interesting, but I'm not writing home yet. But it does create some nice chunking. There's probably other ways to do that too, but that's pretty cool. Okay, so let me get back. We've got H polish and we've got polish, and we learned that the difference is preserve edge and trails. Let me take 2 seconds to explain trails, because it's super, super easy. As your brush moves along the surface, you know, it's got that sphere of influence, right? And that sphere of influence moves along the surface. When you add trails, you add more spheres. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So trails of 5 adds 4 more spheres of influence, and they just trail behind it. And then there's an extra little feature to trails where it starts to unify these strokes, these different spheres of influence. So it's a way to extend your sphere of influence along the stroke and with greater effect. Like Lazy Mouse, as Rodrigo brings out. Like Lazy Mouse, but different. And Lazy Mouse is really clear. Like if your stroke is this white line, the red equals where your stroke is, where your cursor is right now, then white would be the sphere of influence trailing behind that. And so Lazy Mouse is designed to do one thing, and that is cleaner strokes. Okay? So Lazy Mouse averages all of the stroke movement here in between where the sphere of influence is and where the red dot is. So for Lazy Mouse, if your stroke went like this, da 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 da, and you had a Lazy Mouse step of like I don't know, 200. Let's put your sphere of influence back here, your red dot equals there. It would literally average out all of that and just create one clean stroke, even though you had done all this crazy stuff. That's with a lazy step of something like 200 or something. Lazy stroke is about a cleaner stroke. Trails is about more impact within your stroke. And it also cleans it up. Pretty, complicated when you get down and think about it. It's some very in-depth stuff. But that's one way to do it. And let's see. John is saying, so Lazy Mouse normalizes the stroke while Trails unifies more spheres in a stroke. John has it very well put. And Thomas is asking, where is Lazy Mouse? So stroke, Lazy Mouse, and there you go. It's on, and you'll notice lazy step is there. By 200, I meant 2, by the way. Or you can set it to 10. Actually, I'm sorry. That's not what I meant. Lazy radius is what I meant by 200. And I forgot it only goes to 100. So these are the variables you have to deal with. Lazy radius, distance, lazy step. It's kind of the sampling along that, so to speak. But the easiest way to think about it is lazy step is designed to smooth, Lazy Mouse is designed to smooth out your stroke. It's, who wants to put the word lazy in their program? I don't know. But the idea is you don't have to control your hand. And those of you who aren't perfect draftsmen will know what I mean. When you go in and you start to sketch, the stroke just doesn't kind of happen like you want. You know, you don't have that, say, perfect stroke, which this is not the perfect stroke. That represents pure, magical, classical beauty, you know. I don't have it. I don't want it. You know, I wouldn't mind if it fell in my lap, but I do know what it takes to get that, and it is, you know, a lot of work. Lazy step. It's for that lazy part of you who doesn't want to spend 2 years studying classical draftsmanship. Kurt, I brought up steady mouse, steady stroke, and they did not want that. They wanted lazy. Maybe making a point. I don't know. It is like lag. And as T-Laws says, yes, it helps me a lot because I have a shakiness in my hand. Yeah, totally. So now it's actually discriminatory that they're calling us lazy. This is great. I think we've got something here. Just reading through questions. Okay. All right, I think we're good right now. Okay, so where were we? We were at H polish. Now let's take a look at something else. I want to introduce you to how you can use this depth mask feature, because the depth mask is actually relatively important for H polish. Let's turn this off. Use H polish. Get rid of that alpha. Now, that's one set of behaviors. I'm going to move that off to the side here and snapshot it to canvas by pressing Shift-S. I'm going to undo that. And let's put depth mask back on. Okay. And we got a bit of a different result here. By limiting the effect of it to a certain parameter, we basically kept this chunk here and a little bit of this chunk over there. We just kept it from getting chunked in and kind of destroyed. And if we were to make this even tighter, like draw that way down and way down and way down, then the effect would be even more specific to just that one specific threshold right there. See? Because we're forcing that, normally that sphere, to collapse itself into a smaller sphere, more of an oval. That's what depth masking does. And it's very visual here. You can also force that deeper into the model so that it does not affect the surface. Okay, let me see if you can see this. I'm going to click here. It is going to affect down here, and it is going to leave everything in this green squiggly area alone. Okay, that was partly true. It affected that a little bit. But mostly it grabbed and pulled down. So this is a really cool way to kind of move things down. Yeah. And in many ways, you'd want to do this if you need to deal with some like interior stuff. Here we go. Just add some depth. I can press Alt and bring something out. It's just another level of operations. Try doing this with once orientate. It's really cool. You can propagate planes through the model if your topology is set up correctly. Okay, and then we can also just pick it straight from the side here, and this way we can kind of rotate this around. And we can create this kind of depth layering. Let's carve out a center in here. Let's open that and that a little bit. And start to flatten that, right? Okay. So that's a pretty cool feature. Let me check in with you guys. If I use depth masking with backtrack line, it leaves some stuff out, and rest is flat surface. That's awesome. Okay, good, cool. Glad. That's just a good positive thing. All right. H-polish or do I want to show planar? No, we looked at what we had, what we needed to see there. Let's do this. I thought this was pretty cool. I'm going to come over here to the side to clay buildup. Right. I'm going to come into clay tubes. My embed, set that to 5, and I'm going to set once orientate on, and I'm going to press Alt. Just quickly kind of get some layering in there. Okay, take your slower first stroke, or we need to smooth that stroke out, so we can go lazy mouse and go really low lazy step, and take your lazy radius to 0. There we go. So again, what I did right there is I went into lazy mouse, turned it on, and I set lazy step low, and I set lazy radius to 1. That's a trick. Good trick. But it lets you use lazy mouse without having to have that thing kind of bugging you all the time. That trail. Okay, I just wanted to get something a little bit different. Okay. You can see how fast this is. It's pretty cool. Okay, it's not everything I want right now, but it's going to work. Just need a little bit more breaking there. There we go. Okay. A little bit more shale. But I don't want too much of this staccato. Okay. And you could spend forever doing these things. Okay. Now I want to try something else. H-polish. I want to go in fact, reset all brushes. That's probably wise. H-polish. Come in with this alpha 58. Let's see what this does. And continuous, continuous. That's not the one I want. I want polish alpha 58. No. Sorry guys, I'm reading the wrong one. Ah, that's what I want. Reset. Okay, I'm going to completely remove what I did with H-polish. There. So this is all clay buildup, clay tubes. Now I want to go into this planar brush. and I'm going to go into alpha 25. And what happens if I use alpha 25? Okay, that's not what I'm going for, but it's kind of interesting. Let's go picker, orientation. Let's go continuous orientation. So I'm switching this. I'm going to lower the draw size. Oh, gets crazy in those areas. I can go into samples, see if I can increase my sample radius so that it doesn't go as crazy. I don't know if you noticed that, but increasing the sample radius made it behave better. That's not really what I wanted, but it's an option. And I think we've gone over quite a bit. So let's stop this and go into a small recap. And then I want to answer questions. Okay, I'm going to recap now. We took a look at the types, a small look, okay, and what I really want you to do is experiment and get a sense of what is really working for you, what these brushes mean to you and how they operate. And then we went into some of these settings. Okay, we spent a lot of time on depth, and mostly depth is really important to me so that you understand that one concept, how Z intensity is just how fast you get there, but your maximum speed is depth. Depth is the really important thing. Okay, and then we got into picker palette. Okay, we got into preserve edge. Okay, and this is really the polish brushes and how they function and how they think. Okay. Really important to understand that because they're a large part of where this program is going. There's no doubt about that. They're definitely moving in that direction. Okay, the picker in terms of orientation and also depth. Okay, that's kind of important. And then let's see, what else did we get into? We got into a little bit of sample at the end. But there's really, it's not that much else. Auto masking, modifiers, we got into trails a little bit, if I can spell trails correctly. Twist, orientation, elasticity, surface. We got into tablet pressure, that's actually important. Alpha and texture is kind of relevant when you get into patterns. Clip brush modifier is not really that relevant for us. Smooth brush modifier is not really that relevant. Fiber mesh, not that relevant. We covered the primary things. Curve depth samples and modifiers and tablet pressure. Let me just black out everything else. Those 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are really the height of it. Okay, we also got into stroke a bit and got into the lazy mouse settings and things of that nature. So, how do you put your knowledge to the test? How do you put your knowledge to the test that you understand the brush system? Now, to date, you've really just been getting into the point of, how do I say it? You've been sculpting, hitting expectations, and hitting the abilities, all of that stuff. What I want you to do now is shift entirely, and let's just practice on a column. Try to create a column, something that is going to give you a chance to create some pretty serious intensity. Now, in many ways, a column is a really simple exercise. Okay, because it's a broken down column. What are you gonna how are you gonna do it? But there's a lot you could do with this, and I would love to see you explore things like the blob brush. And I want you to think about this as though it's a hero column. Every square inch really needs to be sculpted. And you really need to experiment with brushes and then strokes. So here's blob and spray stroke. That's pretty cool. Surely that can be useful. Let's lower the Z intensity a bit. And there, now you see it's more impactful. And then let's throw an alpha in there. It's an interesting texturing tool, right? It's kind of neat. See what you can make of it. Gillian's asking, what is backtrack line? Let me see. I think we have, yes, I have a lecture on that. I prefer you view the lecture because it's like, just a couple minutes, but it'll change our brains too much. And I don't want to alter your brains right now. I want to kind of stop right now and then send you on your way. Okay. Riley, thanks for posting that. H-polish with build-up off, small sample radius, and once orientate, behaves real nice. Yeah, get in there and see if you can really carve edges. If you were sculpting in clay, you would be moving your hand around to kind of push in form, pull in. You'd move your body so that you're looking at it from below. You can't do that digitally. And I know the tools are going to get better, but basically right now we use things like preserve edge, we use things like stabilize, orientation, sample radius, we use things like trails and brush modifiers, and we use all of these things in depth to do what we would much more naturally do with our hands. But think about this as just the beginning. I mean, these features, this whole brush system is getting built for the computers that exist today, and these computers are changing. Remember, what is it? If you ever want to know about that stuff, you just read Ray Kurzweiler. He's great. Lots of awesome thoughts for where computers are going. And since he's a chief engineer at Google, that's quite promising. So we're supposed to have computer brains by 2030, I think. It's only 18 years away, guys. I'll be young. So, all right. I don't see any questions. Did anybody lose audio? No, it's back. Okay. All right. Get in, sculpt the column, go easy on yourself. There is a lot of lectures. There is a lot of technical stuff. But technical stuff is only there to improve the sculpting stuff. So you really just need to know it to the extent in which it improves your sculpting, or in my particular case and some of yours, to the extent you need to teach it. If a column isn't working for you, I have no problem if you create a rock. Columns are rocks. They give us an opportunity to sculpt semi-organic form without a whole set of expectations. It's much more experimental. Fred has a question? And Rodrigo answered it. Use the transpo tool. Let me draw. Fred, you're asking. I had a transpose tool, and I used it to flatten the model. And basically, you see there's an orientation. You see that red dot, right? One of these, I'm just going to say one of them, just because if you don't know which one, you just check it, and if it's not the one you want, then you redraw it. Oh, that's kind of cool. So it does these things. It's the one that you start with. Hope that helped. Raven, you can do a rock. Thomas, yes, I can do that right now. Joshua, since you're in the cert, and if you're already familiar with the stuff inside of ZBrush, this is your chance to really push things and get help from me and the other guys to go even deeper. So I'm not going to restrict you. Go deep if you want. And then do ask the questions, anything that you need to take you further. Thomas, you want to know about how to save and do multi-views? Yes. Okay. I will show you that right now. Let's say you get your model. You're going to position one view, all right? And then you go to transform and you click this camera icon. You just click it once. And then you can move the model off, rotate it again, transform camera icon, move it off, and there you go. Now once you've done this, document, and you can either export the screen grab, which is the entire thing, or you just go document and you save as, sorry, document, where's export? Export. I'm going to export it as a JPEG. It gives me some settings, what's my quality, and hit OK. There you go. Let me know, Thomas, if that helped. Mark, side note, thanks to staff, showing the qualifier keys on the screen. Cool, glad. Alvaro, could you explain briefly how to modify a brush to make a strand of hair like in the flowing hair tutorial? Alvaro, a strand of hair? About 20,000 ways to do that. I'm going to press Control-N to erase all of that stuff. One way that people do hair, and I can just show this real quickly. They use something like clay buildup. They build or they mass in the hair. Okay, hair is massed. There's clumps, right? So depending on what your hair is doing, it's clumped in there. So now I'm going to turn symmetry off, and I'm going to kind of pull a chunk down here, or let's say, now I really need lazy step to be 0.05, because that staccato stuff is really messing with me. So you need to think about not strands of hair. If you're thinking about strands of hair, you're going to go crazy. You need to think about chunking, which is going to make you go crazy enough. Okay, and make sure you check out my lessons that I put out leading up to the cert registration. Now, one way that we do individual strands is you just do individual strokes. So it gives the appearance of strands. Another way is that you come in with an alpha like alpha 58, and that creates the appearance of strands as well. Smooth it out, and you can get some decent effects. Let me know, Alvaro, if that helped. And Alvaro, I also have a on my YouTube, there's a hair demo. No worries, it's ancient. The hair tutorial is ancient. All right, thanks, guys. Thomas, glad this is working for you. Tila, it's very cool. Eric, is there a way to add materials to an object that is basically one layer without deforming? Material. By material, you do not mean these materials. By a material, you probably are thinking in traditional terms, adding depth to the polygons or sculpting the polygons. And by layer, I'm not sure what you mean. Add material to an object that is basically one layer without deforming. Okay, I think I understand what you're saying. All right, so let's say, for example, you have a mechanical surface like this, and then you want to go in and you want to add very specifically material like that. That's at a fairly constant depth. Am I right, Eric? Yes, okay. I can demonstrate that real quick, actually, and that's a good thing because it's one more small part of the brush system. So let's demonstrate first the problem that Eric is describing. So I'm going to go into a polyplane, or I'm just going to go into plane 3D, and I'm going to say make polymesh. That way it says PM3D, and I can sculpt it. I'm going to divide it till it's about 200,000. Yeah. Put some perspective on. Now let's assume I have a stroke. Or better yet, let's get really mechanical. I'm going to use mask, control, click and drag. Control, click to invert, move, click, and pull out. Or better yet, I think it's control. Well, let's just go like that. There we go. So we have this type of surface. I'm just going to go into Dynamesh because I need some edging, and I'm going to say Dynamesh. Man, ZBrush is not wanting to do what I want it to do today. That's fine. I will not fight it. Okay. So the question is, how do you add continuous depth along something like this? That's good. This is a good last question for us to take. Let me see if I can relax that topology. Yes. Good, that works. It gave me better polygons. Oops. Well, that'll be see how this kind of folds in on itself? I'm going to leave that as a problem because this side is fine. So if we have a problem over here, then we'll know that that's just a problem the algorithm can't solve. But basically the goal would be, at this point, how do we add something just to this area? Okay. If you want to do that, you know, one thought is you might come in and you might use, say, clay buildup, and you do one stroke, but you'll notice a problem. That's not going to add uniformly, and it deforms things. So Eric, please keep me in line here. Make sure this is the question I'm answering the right question. There is the option to use something called the layer brush. Okay, and I'm going to do one stroke of the layer brush as is. The layer brush also uses the depth setting. Gets a little mixed up right in there. Let's set our embed a little higher. Uh-oh. I haven't used this brush in a while. It could be not behaving correctly. Well, let's try it. I'm going to need to test my solution real quick, guys, because they could have modified it. Yeah. Let me check. Eric, I'm not going to find the right way for that. It looks like that one feature is not continuous between versions. So the one solution somebody recommended is you create a mask, and then now you can kind of pull out. But you do have this issue, so maybe you have to scale it out uniformly and move. But I'm not saying that you're going to get the, pure uniformity in your approach. Wish I could give you a cleaner answer to that. The layer brush used to work with morph targets, but something I'm doing is not functioning correctly. All right, guys, that's all I got. Last little bit to warp your brains. Have a fantastic weekend. We will get this up before you go. Well, we'll get this up as soon as possible. And I will talk to you all later. Take care, Joanne, Kurt, Jim, Alvaro, Joshua, Raven, Orla, Fred, Gilong. All right, guys, take care. Thanks so much for being here. Remember, rocks and columns, and just really start to create some of that kind of quasi-organic form.
The organizer